Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Horse meat has contaminated the UK food chain. Pork DNA has been found in prison food. This evening's big question, how halal is halal? I'm delighted to be joined by the Operations Director of the Halal Monitoring Committee, Faz Mullah. Faz Mullah, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So prior to the break, we were talking about standards that the HMC adopts when certifying or verifying the halal status, if you like, of meat and such like. Let's talk a little bit, we've spoken about animal welfare, let's talk a little bit about the hygiene and the safety of food. What processes and procedures are in line when it comes to that?
Clearly, halal is not just about the slaughter. Halal is also about tayyib, which is pure and cleanliness. And in terms of our inspection, at the slaughterhouse, we ensure that products are being produced not only to the halal standard, but are following the process that one would expect of slaughterhouses in this country. We also visit shops, and therefore, we're often assisting shop owners to improve health and hygiene and educating in terms of standards that we should be following in terms of health and hygiene. So it's not sufficient for just products to be halal. I think we, as a Muslim community, we need to do significantly more work in order to improve the quality of our shops and restaurants and environments that meat is produced in. And it is a challenging environment. The industry is continually driven by cost, high-speed production, and cutting corners. And we need to encourage a much more ethical supply chain, as we talked about earlier, but also continue to improve halal standards beyond what is expected within the law, because I think the expectation of halal is more than just animal is slaughtered in a certain way. Sure. So I think we will continue to grow. I think we are evolving our standards and working with the industry to improve and for the benefit of the consumers.
All right, and traceability, I suppose, is a fundamental point. Traceability of the supplies that may hit shops and restaurants and such like. What processes and procedures are in place when it comes to ensuring, traceability, I suppose?
Yeah, HMC takes that supply chain very seriously, and that's why we operate a closed system. And within that system, we start right from the front end of the supply chain in terms of animal entering into the slaughterhouses. We have a continuous inspection system, at the end of which the products are labeled and sealed, much the same as the Jewish community do for kosher. In fact, it's based on some of the lessons that we learned from observing the way the kosher is managed and handled. So we know that meat produced in a plant certainly met the halal criteria, and by the end of that process, we've either labeled it and sealed it, ready for transportation. So that's the first stage of the life cycle of meat that enters into our supply chain. We put a unique labeling number, and that number is unique to HMC and our systems, and that allows for traceability for HMC particular products. We pick that up in terms of, certainly some products will go directly to butchers and restaurants, but other products may go through an intermediary in terms of processing. And this is where, additional checks are made. So, if you are a processing plant making sausages or burgers or kebabs, then we will ensure that only HMC tagged meat enters that processing plant. And at the end of that process, we once again will relabel the product. So now we've traced it from slaughterhouse through a processing plant. And when finally products arrive in shops, they have traceability marks, and that's what our monitors are looking for. So the inspections I talked about, monitors going 3, 4, 5 times a week, will mean that they walk into establishments like restaurants and butchers looking for the labeling that we tracked to ensure that only meat from HMC approved places are present within shops. And if they're not, we take, if it's critical and critical, we will remove the certification instantly. Sure.
And that's an interesting point, though, because I suppose it's at the intermediate realm where contamination may possibly take place. So say you've got a factory, for example, that deals with sausages, pork, and also deals with halal meat. What steps, processes, procedures, again, are there in place to prevent cross-contamination?
This is a very important point. HMC will not work at a plant where pork is being processed. It is far too great a risk in terms of cross-contamination issues. People talk about clean up and clean down procedures in order to remove traces, but in our experience, the reputational risk of working at such a plant and the risk it adds to the supply chain is not worth it.
And what about non-halal meat then?
Most of the plants we work at are halal plants. One or two of them may do different variants of halal. So, some plants will work with us for the first half of the day doing unstunned halal, and they may then go on to produce stunned halal. Yeah. So we ensure that the products that are marked for the HMC supply chain are observed, at the end of which labeled, tracked and closed off, and then the plant will continue to work on beyond, and we will leave the premises. So most of our plants that we work at are producing halal. If there are plants that are producing non-halal, then certainly where pork is concerned, we certainly would not.
So for non-halal plants, do you work with them or not?
We work at part production plants, and
what's a part production?
So a part production plant. A little bit of technical jargon, so apologies.
Right.
A part production plant is doing halal, and in most cases they're doing halal again, but not meeting our standards.
So what about the non-most cases?
I'm thinking through the 80 plants we have, and I can't recollect one location where we do halal and non-halal. So yes, we have part production plants, and I guess it wouldn't make a difference if a slaughterhouse is producing HMC for 3/4 of the day, and we close the production, we mark the production, we segregate, and we leave. Then we won't be present in terms of knowing what happens at that plant. But we certainly would know that the production that took place was closed and sealed, so that product supply chain is now HMC.
But I suppose there is a small issue of contamination. So once you've gone off, and whatever goes on in your absence, then you come back the following day, there is a possibility there for cross-contamination, right? So
yeah, I mean, cross-contamination is a significantly important issue, and therefore where we do work in production plant, we do a risk assessment, we look at where the critical points of failure might be, and we have a significantly more rigorous approach to inspection, and also we do rely on regulations in terms of what we expect suppliers and owners of plants to adhere to. So we are checking, and clearly, there is no completely closed system. If we were to take this to the extreme, then the only extreme scenario is that we own our own farms, we produce our own meats and sell it in our own shops.
An interesting point you made there is I was going to come back to the farm issue, because you made reference to the fact that when meat comes into the abattoir, for example, and such, where it's actually slaughtered, then you've got the inspectors present and all the rest of it. So what about the farm? Do you guys inspect farms?
We know where our slaughterhouses are buying their meat from, in terms of the farms they're buying from, yes, of course. In terms of inspection at farms, we don't do that. I mean, it's not part of our process at the moment, but moving further up the supply chain is a continual observation in some areas that we need to do. Do we care about what animals are eating, for example? If you have chicken feeding themselves
do you inspect that on farms?
We're not at farms at present.
Right.
Our inspection starts as animals enter the food supply chain at slaughterhouses. That's the first point of check. Of course, we can check paperwork in terms of where they've come from and the legality of.
But we've actually got a call, but I'm going to get to the calls in a moment. This is an important point here, because so therefore the HMC does not actually inspect farms. So therefore, when it comes to animal welfare, potentially the argument is, Faz, well, you guys haven't got a clue.
In terms of
no idea what's going on.
We are not present, but that doesn't mean.
Should you be present? Is that something you feel that your organisation ought to look into?
In terms of whether it makes a product halal or haram, clearly, we have a increasing need to ensure and understand where animals are coming from and how
Absolutely.
they're kept and etc. And it's an area where we think we need to continue to add more focus. I don't think there's any certification body today that does this. We rely on farms to meet UK legislation in terms of animal welfare. And clearly, in the food supply chain, we've already found that that hasn't always been adequate. So it is an area for growth. We don't do it today. Maybe we should.
So, because potentially, so the argument is, you made reference to the Panorama documentary, there could be chickens that have been injected with pork that turn up at the abattoir, and you'd have no way, under the present system, of knowing whether or not that's happened, would you?
Well, you would have to look at the risk of why would people want to inject a chicken that is alive with pork, and the motivation for doing something like that. Clearly, there are many things that potentially people could do, and our systems are based on trying to look at the supply chain and look at weaknesses of where contaminations are occurring, where problems are known, and then to...
We did what they're fed. They could be fed all sorts of things.
Yes, and if you look at the Islamic jurisprudence on if a chicken, for example, were to eat a non-halal product, does that make that animal haram for us to consume? The answer is no, because even in the wild, animals will eat animals, and they're not selecting halal food.
Sure, but if they're actually fed, the difference would be that in the wild they'll eat whatever,
correct. And
whatever
in the UK,
nature dictates. But if you're in a cage and you're fed something, you're
in
the
UK legislation, as of post the BSE scare a few years back, means that animals are fed a vegetarian diet, and that is enshrined in UK law. Clearly, that the law protects us from that, but as you say before, just because there's law doesn't necessarily mean that these things aren't happening.
Sure.
So yes, we should continue to ask more questions of farms, or at least declarations in terms of understanding where meat is coming from, and we should continue to demand more in terms of animal welfare and quality. Our focus has mainly been around ensuring that the key fundamentals of halal are being met. We've had a significant amount of effort and work and energy understanding the supply chain, where the problems exist, with a view to putting in procedures to improve the halal supply chain. And that's what HMC has been doing. I think we need to continue to grow. We need to have food scientists. We need to have innovation in terms of how we can improve the management of halal, because I think that's what the Muslim communities and consumers are demanding. That's what we need to continue to evolve to be.
Sure. All right, well, we've got a call, so let's I don't want to neglect the callers for too long, so we'll take one or two calls, and then we'll continue on. A lot of important issues to get through. So, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, brother.
Thank you for calling in. Go ahead.
Yeah, brother, my name is Khurram. I live in Swansea, Wales, yeah?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to know, in Swansea there's only 3 or 4 shops, the halal shops, yeah? I can see mostly Muslim community, Muslim people who live in Swansea. They went to the McDonald's, they eat McDonald's chicken over there. I'm a little bit confused.